Recent reports have come out suggesting the Chicago Bulls could be inquiring on two more players that could fit them perfectly. This is your host, Joey Mercer. This is another episode of Bulls Digest. And before we get into it there today, I just want to say that about 88% of you that watch these videos are not subscribed. So if you aren't already subbed to the channel, make sure to go down below, hit the subscribe button, turn on that bell for notifications, and every single time we upload, you will be notified so you can keep up to date with the Chicago Bulls and our opinions here on those moves, acquisitions, whatever it may be. We will keep you up to date. So without further ado, let's get into the topic of today, and that is a new look for the Bulls. So we've talked about superstars being traded to the Bulls. We've talked about good starters being traded to the Bulls. We've even talked about some smaller moves when it comes to prospects being moved to the Bulls. But we haven't talked about really solid role players. Those are the guys that have come up today that really sparked my interest because those guys can really push you over the edge and become different identities for them even if they get in a different situation and start to become good starters. I think one of these guys for sure could definitely turn into that with the Chicago Bulls as his play style really fits our system. The article that I'll be citing today that really brought my interest to this was two players who can help the Chicago Bulls when the trade deadline comes. These players can help elevate the Windy City team. This article is by Stephen Beslick at Sports Illustrated, and when he says Windy City team, he is not talking about the Windy City Bulls, but he's talking about, of course, the NBA team, the Chicago Bulls. Now, when we get into this, I'm going to start on this article, is very, very interesting, these two players, but please hear me out when I mention both of them. The first thing in the article was, the recent ascent of the Chicago Bulls from the basement of the Eastern Conference has placed them in a tricky position. While the team was positioned to be sellers at the start of December after they sputtered to a 5-14 start to the season, their recent run of form has sparked talk of a potential playoff push. But with the trade deadline fast approaching, the Bulls front office needs to decide which direction to take the franchise in. And I think we all know by now that regardless of which position we feel like the Chicago Bulls should be taking, whether they should stay put, rebuild, or retool, this team at the very most is going to be doing a retool. Even if they don't have the players in position to do anything, they're going to try to always make a push for the playoffs. That's who the Chicago Bulls have been for as long as I can remember. It's been a very long time since we've been willing to tank at all. It was actually since Scotty, MJ, everybody left at the late 90s. And then they were finally like, we don't want to be in a forever rebuild. Let's try to do this quickly. It didn't work out. We were years on end. Finally, we start making the playoffs again in the mid-2000s. Got Rose, went down the injury, and now we know the rest is just history, of course. But it's time now for them really to make a solid decision. Are they just going to do a retool? Seems to be that's going to be the most case. Should they rebuild? Maybe so. It's time to really sit down and think about what is best for the fan base and the team. Because I think the fans are really, really hoping for a rebuild, or for the majority of that, for that matter. The first player that we'll be talking about coming up shortly, they said, do they make changes around the fringes and keep this party going? Or do they tear the roster down and strip it of its high-priced stars? If they elect to take the second path, here are two players Bleacher Report believes could help the Bulls in their rebuild efforts. So that first player is Gary Trent Jr., and if the Bulls decide to engage other teams in trade talks, the front office must consider younger players who can grow with the likes of Kobe White and Patrick Williams. One such player is the Toronto Raptors guard, Gary Trent Jr. I think he's a perfect fit for the team. He's a good 3 and D player. He does get a few deflections and steals on the defensive end. If you're talking about his on-ball defense, it's okay, but it's not nowhere near as good as his deflection and ability to get steals on the ball. His overall on-ball defense is about average, but not as good as those aspects I just mentioned. He obviously isn't a shot blocker as he has a shorter wingspan at the shooting guard position, but can provide some solid shooting if put in the right system, and I believe that the Bulls could use whatever three-point shooting they could get right now. He's still a pretty young player and is definitely able to show some mentorism while still being young enough to be on the team in a couple of years along these guys that were just mentioned, Kobe White and Patrick Williams. Gary Trent Jr. I mentioned before when we talked about different trades with the Raptors, and some of them even featured him as the top player along with Chris Boucher and Precious Achiuwa. Obviously that isn't happening now because Achiuwa was traded to the Knicks in the OG Anunoby deal. But I think that Gary Trent Jr. is a solid person for us to go after, and instead of us trying to knock on the door for these stars or superstars, we can take whatever we can get. And Gary Trent Jr., we can make some difference there. Somebody that the fans could be happy to cheer for, and I think he could definitely put up some numbers for us and just add a bit of diversity to the team. Something different isn't always bad, and sometimes it's the best thing to do, and I think this situation is definitely the right one to do that. Next thing we saw, and it was the 24-year-old will give a jolt to this perimeter attack, a career 38% from distance, not to mention replace some of the offensive loss in the potential Zach Lavine trade. Trent's scoring output has sagged a bit this season, but he pumped in better than 15 points per night each of the past 3 seasons, Zach Buckley wrote. And that's absolutely accurate. I mean, he's a 15-point per game scorer, of course. I mean, the numbers, the stats are there. He is a solid player getting steals, as I just mentioned, and a solid 3-point shooter. What's wrong with getting Gary Trent at the right value? You tell me, because I think there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. Solid trade, somebody the Bulls should look after for sure. I love that deal for the Chicago Bulls. The next thing we saw was Quentin Grimes, the second player. Another player the Bulls could add to their young core is the New York Knicks' Quentin Grimes. With the Knicks recently trading for OG Anunoby, Grimes' spot in the rotation may be in jeopardy, making him a potential trade target. It's not just now in jeopardy, but they've not really put him in the rotation as much as he was last year at all. It seems as if he is a solid 3-and-D player. He can fit into different rotations. He's not a guy that's going to put up 25 a night or even 15 a night for that matter. But he can still produce for you off the bench. I think he would fit fine in the Chicago Bulls lineup, and he would be my second option behind Gary Trent Jr. if we were unable to get him in a trade. A player that's disgruntled and, not getting any playing time, why not, if you're the Chicago Bulls, pick him up? It's a similar situation in Golden State with Moses Moody not being very happy with the 3 straight DNPs. If the Bulls were able to acquire any of those guys, why not go out there and get them while lowballing the other team while this news is out to the media, because they know that it's not good for them to have those players on the team while they're disgruntled. You might as well move them for whatever you can and get value. Get value back for your players. Don't let anybody walk in free agency. It's the worst thing you can do as a team, is just kind of hope and wait that they are going to re-sign in the offseason, because you really need to make sure that players are committed to staying if their deals are expiring. Why didn't they sign extensions and so on and so forth? Get value for players that you aren't sure are staying, and make sure to keep value within the team instead of losing it to another team and possibly even a rival in that fact. Last thing was the quote from Zach Buckley that we saw in Quentin Grimes, saying, "He's a hard-nosed defender with a low-maintenance offensive game, built around efficient shooting and sound decision-making. He could handle a significant role in the rotation right now, and still capable of more down the line. In other words, he could be a supporting piece with this core and perhaps help grow the next nucleus with Kobe White, Patrick Williams, and Ayo Dosunmu." I'm not really too sure if Quentin Grimes is quite that good of a player, but he definitely has shown some spurts. It's just hard to show it where the Knicks bury a lot of their talent right now and really just run everything through Brunson and Randall. Even OG Anunoby, since he's gone there, has had quite literally the lowest usage percentage of his career, although only in about a 3-game stretch. But it's still to note that those two guys in Brunson and Randall have the ball in their hands a lot, which is definitely taking away a lot of shine from some of the guys on that roster. This has been your host, Joey Mercer. Hope you enjoyed the episode there today. Make sure to go down below, like and comment on the video, and subscribe to the channel. We're doing this every single day, or every day that we possibly can, of course. And I can't wait to see you all in the next one. This is your host, Joey Mercer, signing out.